Audio sync.
She sells
seashells by the seashore. We're shaking booktube, my name's Cam and welcome back to another writing tip video. Today is the first video in a new series I'm doing called Writing Cliches to Avoid, and this is the fantasy edition. Not only will I be pointing out some of the most used tropes in fantasy, no sir, I'll be giving you some alternatives or some quick fixes so that you can avoid those cliches, those tropes comfortably. Hello all, thanks for joining me again for another video, for another writing tip video. As I said, this is the first video in a new series I'm doing called Writing Cliches to Avoid, and this is the fantasy one. So I'll be trying to go through a few different genres, a few different types of writing, and the first one I thought I would tackle is the genre that most writers start with, and that's fantasy. I want to give a kind of quick disclaimer though. First of all, yes, these are things that I've used in my writing as well, but that's why I think videos like this are so important, so that we can collectively try to find some solutions to these tropes and try to avoid it becoming the norm for all stories. And secondly, you shouldn't feel like these cliches are things that you absolutely can not do. I mean, these aren't bad things to do in your writing necessarily, it's just stuff that has been used to the point of becoming cliches. So at the very least, you should explore other options before implementing these plot devices. And what you'll find is that most of these cliches fall under what I like to call the Tolkien formula. I mean, these are things that Tolkien wasn't by any means the first person to do, but a bit of fun trivia for you. He was the first person to take things like, dwarves and elves and some of these cliches and put them into a complex narrative. So although he didn't invent some of this stuff, he was the first one to put it into what you would call now the high fantasy. Before Tolkien, this stuff was pretty much used only for fairy tales and short stories, kind of mythology, fan fictions. And because Tolkien was pretty much the first one to do this kind of complex fantasy or high fantasy, it's become a staple for fantasies now. And some of the stuff is what would define the story as a fantasy. But again, when overused, like anything else, it can just become a bit tiring for the reader, and it can end up making you look a bit derivative. Jumping straight into it, the first thing I want to talk about is races.
Well, now that's all right, no mama. That's all.
No, we are not getting political. I am talking about fantasy races. I'm talking about dwarves and elves, specifically those two. I would put it in the 4 categories: dwarves, elves, man, and the bad race. Let's call them the orcs. It's becoming way too common for fantasy that you would have the dwarves, or a very similar race to dwarves, which are basically short and hairy and specialize with building things. And for some reason, always seem to have a Scottish accent. And then you've got the elves, who specialize primarily with plant kind of stuff, and they're described as being tall and pure, usually blonde and fair-skinned, blue eyes, that kind of thing. So you've got the dwarves, who are the short, dirty builders, and the elves, who are the very clean, usually vegetarian, pure race. When you break it down like that, it starts to sound extremely offensive, but that's not the direction I'm going in here. So you've got the dwarves, the elves, and then the orcs, or the bad race, who are usually super ugly, super stupid, and serve pretty much only the purpose of the big bad, of serving the big bad and being extremely violent and not really having any kind of three-dimensional thought. They just want to destroy. And then, of course, you've got the race of man, who is usually the hero in the story. The relatable, normal characters. So that's a cliche. That's something that's been overused to absolute death at this point, and here's what my fix for that would be. I would say, yeah, you can take inspiration from those races, you can use some of their characteristics, personalities, but really you have to try and be original. And I don't just mean naming them something different, although obviously that's a direction you'd want to go in, but try to come up with some original physical characteristics as well. Maybe play around with mixing and matching some of those personality traits or physical traits from these various races you've seen in stories. Mix them around a bit and try to add in something a bit original to really differentiate. That's really the only thing I can say, because the point here is that comes down to you being original. The second cliche is the object.
Well, now that's all right, now, mama. That's all.
You know, something like the One Ring of Power or the Elder Wand from Harry Potter. It's something that can change the tide of everything just by whoever's in possession of it. It always seems to come down to it. You don't require any kind of skill to use the one object. You don't have to be someone specific to use the one object. It's just whoever has it holds the balance. And because morally, we would see that as a bad thing, the hero is almost always going to destroy it or try to destroy it, or their aim is to destroy it. So my fix for that would be add some complexity into it. Don't make the story revolve around the object. Make it a side character, if you will, to something more important, which is character complexity. Maybe make it so the one object isn't just a one object. Maybe something else is required to really utilize that if you have to put this one object into your story. Just make sure there's more involved than just picking it up and winning, you know? And like I said, the one object should always be secondary to the character arcs. Number 3, and you're going to see immediately why this is a cliche, because as soon as I say it, a bunch of different stories are going to jump to mind. The Dark Lord.
Well, now that's all right, now, mama. That's all.
The cliche here is that it's almost quite literal as well, because it is usually the name of the big bad. The Dark Lord, the Shadow Lord, something to do with absence of light. And then usually on the flip side, you've got the Bright Lord, or the good person, who is almost always wearing complete white, and they're usually a pure light person. Further to that, with this cliche, I would say that the Dark Lord is usually evil because they're evil. I mean, they might have some history or some lore as to how they ended up the way they are, but their motivation is almost always just that they just want to destroy for the heck of destroying. That's just something I don't enjoy in a villain. I want to, on some degree, sympathize or see where the villain's coming from. They need to believe that they're the good guy. That's what makes a good villain. I think it was George R.R. Martin, and I'm just going off memory here, but he said something along the lines of, the villain always thinks they're the hero. And the fix for that's easy. I basically already said it. Just make the villain three-dimensional. Add some complexity. Make them have a reason for being bad. Make their motivations something that you could in some way see as being kind of right. The best villains make you question whether they are the villain or not. Their methods may be extreme, but their motivations, on some level, need to be something that we could all relate to. And also, maybe toy with the name a bit. Probably don't go with Dark Lord, and probably shift away from them just wearing black robes all the time. Just a thought. The fourth one's going to be a weird one. You might not have heard this brought up before as a cliche, but it's something that I've noticed in a lot of fantasy stories that does bother me on a certain level, and that is animals being used as props. Mostly horses.
Well, now that's all right, now, mama. That's all.
You can have these stories where they, although being fantasy, try to be as realistic as possible. And I'm just going to talk specifically about horses, but it does go for a lot of other animals as well. And it's just that they're used as objects or props to ends that would not be physically possible for that animal. For example, horses that seem to have limitless stamina, don't seem to ever get hungry or need to take a shit or ever get sick. It just kind of seems like a lazy plot device to me that these horses can be ridden for 4 days on end without any food or rest, and they're fine. And when the hero gets in a spot of trouble, who comes along to save the day for almost no reason? Mr. Horse, or Mrs. Horse, I'm sorry. And the fix for this one is something that I think would benefit your story more than any of the other fixes I've mentioned, and that's, you could use this realistic stuff that I mentioned is lacking as stuff for the story that would be great. For example, one of the barriers stopping the hero from completing their journey could be the horse getting sick, or could be the hero running out of food for the horse and having to find more. And not just because they need the horse to get from A to B, but because they would have some kind of personal connection with the horse. If we're talking about a hero, it's fair to say that they care about the welfare of the thing that they're riding across the country. The horse becoming sick could be a great plot device. Or maybe the horse is going through a swamp and gets stuck in mud and starts to sink. But yeah, just to summarize, don't just make the animal a prop, make the animal a character. And the last cliche is probably one of the most used ones in fantasy, especially YA, and it's the most painful for me to talk about because it is something I have done. And I'm talking about that hero.
Well, now that's all right, now, mama. That's all.
You know the one I'm talking about. They're an orphan who finds out through the course of the story that they are royalty and they have some kind of special gift that no one else has. They're the last of their line and they're the only one that can save the day, sometimes due to some kind of prophecy. This has been done to death and I have contributed to that. Don't get me wrong, I have no regrets with my story and I still love it, but I don't know. I don't think I would change anything if I could go back, but I wish I would have at least explored some alternatives. Namely, I don't see how the character having a family who loves and supports them could be that much of an issue. Maybe later on in the story they could become something that raises more danger for the hero, although families being used as hostages is again a cliche in itself. Basically, just maybe look for some other motivations for the hero to be a hero other than tragedy, because God knows there's so many. And as far as the hero being royalty or the chosen one, just maybe make them normal, but they rise above anyway. I can only imagine that would make them more special. If I was to put it in a sentence, I would say make the hero special because of the choices they make, not who they are. With that said, I get why this is a cliche, and I think it's because we all want to believe that we're special in some kind of way, and usually it's not in the choices we make. So we hold on hope, or fantasy-wise, we hold on hope to someone turning up one day and saying,
"Hey, guess what? You're actually royalty."
But again, it's a fantasy story, so just maybe take it a different direction. Anyway, that's it. That's some writing cliches to avoid fantasy edition. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I do the thing and if you like the video, maybe follow me on the thing too. I'll see you in the next video. Catch ya.